Cowboy, do you fear me or desire me? She asked, alone in the desert night. The desert night was thick with silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind moving through the dry brush. The moon stood full and commanding above, bathing the land in silver light that turned shadows into figures and figures into shadows. He stood there, a lone cowboy with dust on his coat and time etched into the lines of his face, staring at her as though she had been conjured from the very bones of the earth. Cowboy, do you fear me or desire me? She asked, her voice steady, quiet, but heavy with something unspoken. The way her dark eyes pierced him made the question linger like smoke, impossible to wave away. He adjusted the brim of his hat, not to hide his face but to buy time. He had faced men with pistols at dawn, stared down death on horseback, and buried more companions than he cared to count. Yet here, under the pale glow of the moon, confronted by a woman in black robes with a crucifix dangling from her hand, he found his throat dry, words snagged like thorns in the desert sand. You walk alone in a place where even ghosts don't dare wander, he finally said. That don't make you a woman to be feared, but it don't make you safe either. Her lips curved, not into a smile, but into something between defiance and challenge. Safety is for the meek, she replied. And you, cowboy, are not meek. But you are a man, flesh and blood. And men always choose fear or desire. The night air seemed to thicken between them. He studied her closely, the sharp grace of her jaw, the solemn veil framing her face, the boldness in her eyes that clashed with the modest habit she wore. She was a paradox, a flame wrapped in cloth meant to smother it. He knew danger when he saw it. He also knew beauty. What's a nun doing out here, miles from the chapel walls? He asked, voice low. Don't tell me the Lord sent you walking into the desert with nothing but a rosary for protection. Her gaze flicked past him to the horizon, where the silhouette of a ruined mission lay broken against the starlit sky. That was my home, she said, her tone carrying the weight of memory and loss. It burned, it fell, and with it, the women who believed walls and prayers could save them. I walk now because faith doesn't live in stone or fire. Faith lives in confrontation, and I confront you. He felt a shiver crawl up his spine though the air was warm. The way she spoke, calm, unwavering, wasn't of a woman lost. It was of someone who had already chosen her path and carried her defiance like a sword. You confront me, he repeated. I'm no preacher. I ain't no devil either. Just a man trying to live out his days without meeting death too soon. She stepped closer, the hem of her dress brushing the dust. Her presence filled the space between them, the crucifix glinting as it caught the moonlight. That's what makes it real. The devil comes with horns and fire. Men expect him. Desire comes with beauty. Men long for it. But fear, she leaned in, her words a whisper meant only for him. Fear wears the face of truth. So, cowboy, which do I bring you? He inhaled sharply, realizing he'd been holding his breath. Her nearness unsettled him more than a rattlesnake coiled at his boots. He wanted to step back, but his body betrayed him, rooted in place as though the desert itself demanded he face her. Maybe both, he admitted, voice rough. Maybe that's the trouble. She tilted her head, studying him with a gaze both tender and merciless. Then you are honest, more honest than most. Desire will draw you to me, fear will push you away. The question is not which you feel. The question is which you obey. The words struck him like a bullet that did not kill but lingered, burning in the wound. He thought of the life behind him, of whiskey bottles drained in silence, of cards played under dim lantern light, of women who passed like shadows through his nights. None had ever stood before him and asked for truth. None had ever looked at him as though his soul, not his body, was the weapon she sought to disarm. The moon climbed higher, shadows deepened, and still neither moved. The desert seemed to hold its breath with them. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled, but it was drowned in the quiet storm that gathered between their eyes. Finally, he lifted his hand to the brim of his hat again, but this time he removed it, holding it at his side as a sign of respect, or surrender. You want my answer, sister, he said softly. You scare me like nothing else I've faced, and I want you more than I should. Her chest rose and fell, the rosary tightening in her grip. For the first time, her composure trembled, not broken, but touched by something she hadn't anticipated. Then, cowboy, she whispered, perhaps you finally know feels like. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the barren ground, and the desert night swallowed them whole. Two figures standing in defiance of silence, bound by fear, desire, and something deeper that neither dared name. The wind hissed across the barren plain, carrying with it the scent of dust and memory. He stood before her, hat in his hand, and the weight of his own confession still hung between them like the thick night air. The desert had a way of making men speak truths they never meant to share, as though the emptiness demanded it, as though the stars themselves demanded every soul account for its burdens. And in that moment, under the pull of her dark eyes and the pale gaze of the moon, he realized what he had given her. Not just an answer, but a piece of himself. She did not look away, nor did she soften. The rosary twisted gently in her fingers, the small silver cross gleaming with the fragile light of the heavens. Her hand was steady, but her lips parted ever so slightly as though she were trying to speak and hold back words at once. He saw the shift in her, saw the flicker of something beneath the discipline she carried like armor. It wasn't weakness, it was humanity. You speak as though fear and desire are sins, she said at last, her voice low, carried by the wind so that it reached him like a secret. But they are only mirrors. They show you what you are, not what you pretend to be. His jaw tightened, and he shoved his hat back onto his head, as though covering his bare head might shield him from the sting of her words. Mirrors break easy, he muttered. And when they do, you bleed on the shards. Her gaze didn't waver. Maybe bleeding is the only proof we're still alive. The words settled into him like hot coals in a dying fire, reigniting something long buried. He wanted to scoff, to throw back some hard reply, but the desert silence swallowed his tongue. Instead, he stepped closer, his boots grinding the sand. She didn't retreat. She stood her ground, black veil whispering against the night air, her dark hair catching fragments of moonlight. You talk like a preacher, he said, his tone softer than he intended. But you wear a face that tempts a man to break his vows. Her lips curved again, this time almost into a smile, but it was bitter at the edges. Temptation isn't mine to give, it's yours to claim. A flame can only burn what chooses to touch it. He studied her, how her chest rose steady despite the storm inside her words, how the crucifix glinted like a dagger in her hand. He had fought men in saloons who brandished pistols at his chest and felt less threatened than he did now, less exposed. This woman, cloaked in black, armed only with faith and fire, was undoing him piece by piece, word by word. I told you, he said quietly, you scare me. And yet you stand closer still, she whispered back. The desert floor felt smaller around them, as though the wide, endless expanse of sand and shadow had shrunk to hold only two figures, two souls circling each other in the dark. Behind her, the ruined mission stood silent and skeletal, a ghost of her past watching with hollow windows for eyes. Behind him, the horizon stretched endless, a road he had always believed was his only companion. But here, in the space between them, was something different, something that was neither past nor future, but a raw present that demanded to be lived. He reached for his flask out of habit, fingers brushing the worn leather at his belt, but stopped himself. It wasn't whiskey he needed. Whiskey dulled the edges, made men forget. This moment, sharp and unrelenting, was not meant to be dulled. He let his hand fall back to his side. Why me? He asked finally, his voice almost a plea. Why stand here, in the middle of nowhere, and put this question on me? Fear or desire? Why not another man? She looked past him then, to the vast emptiness where the desert met the sky. The moonlight traced the line of her cheek, softened her in a way that made his chest ache. When she spoke, her words were slow, deliberate. Because the desert chooses its witnesses. And tonight, it chose you. He wanted to protest, to tell her no desert chose anything, that fate was just another word for accidents men dressed up in meaning. But the conviction in her tone was iron, and the weight in her eyes silenced him. Perhaps it wasn't about fate at all. Perhaps it was about her need, her defiance, her hunger to be seen, and his unlucky, or lucky, presence in that very moment. You lost something in that fire, didn't you? He asked gently, nodding toward the broken mission. Her eyes flickered, a crack in her armor. I lost everything. Sisters who prayed beside me. Children who looked to me for safety. A faith that was supposed to be stronger than flames. She paused, her hand tightening around the rosary until the cross bit into her skin. And I lost the part of me that believed God was listening. The confession trembled in the air like a gun drawn but not yet fired. He felt it pierce him, not because he shared her loss but because he knew what it meant to live with silence, to beg for answers in empty skies. He had done the same, staring at stars after men he rode with had fallen in gunfights, after the woman he once thought to marry had left him for another life, another man. He knew silence. He knew it well. God don't answer most folks, he said quietly. Or maybe he answers in ways we don't like. Maybe that's why I stopped asking, a long time ago. She turned her eyes back to him then, searching his face as though she might find truth carved into his weathered skin. For a moment, the fire in her gaze dimmed, replaced by something else, something almost tender. Then perhaps we're alike, she murmured. Both wandering, both wounded, both haunted by what we've lost. The words settled into him like a brand, marking him in ways he hadn't expected. He shifted, feeling the pull of something dangerous yet undeniable. Desire, yes, but more than that, recognition. The night deepened, and the stars scattered brighter across the heavens. The coyote's distant howl faded, and only the sound of the wind remained, a constant reminder that time in the desert moved slow, stretched thin, and every moment could linger like eternity. He took another step closer, close enough now to see the slight tremor of her breath, close enough to feel the heat of her presence despite the cool desert air. His hand lifted, almost of its own. A cord, not to touch her but to hover near her veil, near the fabric that separated the woman from the role she wore. She didn't move away, she only watched him, her eyes wide, unflinching. "Cowboy," she said, her voice a whisper that seemed to echo across the desert. "Do you fear me, or desire me?" The question returned, sharper, heavier, but now it was more than a challenge. Now it was a confession of her own. His throat worked, his chest rising with the weight of the choice she demanded. He could lie, he could turn away, he could walk into the endless horizon and leave her standing there as a figure swallowed by the desert. But he didn't, he couldn't. "I fear you because I desire you," he said finally, his voice rough as gravel. "And I desire you because I fear what'll happen if I don't." For the first time, her lips parted into something like a smile, soft and dangerous all at once. The crucifix slipped from her fingers, dangling loosely now, no longer a weapon but a reminder of what she had carried and what she was willing to risk. The desert held its silence, the stars burned brighter, and the night pulled them closer still, until there was no distance left to measure, no line left to draw. And in that boundless emptiness, they stood, two souls undone, two fires colliding, fear and desire no longer questions, but answers carved into the desert night. The air between them was so charged that even the desert seemed to hesitate, as if the land itself feared to break the fragile, dangerous thread connecting them. His words still hung in the night, heavy with truth, unshakable. "I fear you because I desire you. And I desire you because I fear what'll happen if I don't." It was a confession he hadn't meant to speak, yet once out, it became law, binding both of them in a silent vow the stars bore witness to. Her hand trembled slightly at her side, not with weakness but with an intensity she could no longer disguise. She had held so many masks, prayed so many prayers, walked so many miles beneath the heavy veil of duty, but here, before him, in the desolate dark, she was nothing but a woman with a heart too wild for its cage. Her lips parted, and though no words came at first, her eyes said everything. The fire she kept hidden, the loss she carried, the hunger she feared even more than sin. Then, finally, her voice broke through, softer than the wind but sharper than any blade. "You speak like a man who knows what it is to be haunted." His throat tightened. He looked past her for a moment, into the endless desert, the ruined mission, the memories buried beneath sand and time. "Haunted's one way of putting it," he muttered. "Another way is just living with ghosts." "Ghosts don't live," she said. "They linger. They bind. They poison." He looked back at her then, meeting her gaze head on. "So what are you? A ghost come to bind me? Or something else?" Her answer was silence, but in that silence he saw the truth. She was no ghost, and yet she was not entirely flesh and blood either. She was a reckoning, a reminder that even the hardest men, even the loneliest deserts, could not bury everything. The cowboy shifted, boots grinding into the sand as though grounding himself against a storm he couldn't see but could feel deep in his bones. He'd He'd faced storms before. He'd ridden into gunfights where bullets sang and men fell. But nothing felt like this. The sharp, unrelenting certainty that if he turned away now, he would never be the same. "You test me," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of both accusation and admiration. "I reveal you," she countered. His lips pressed into a thin line, a wry almost smile tugging at the corner though his eyes stayed dark. "Same thing, ain't it?" She stepped closer, just enough that the air between them burned hotter. The moonlight caught the curve of her cheek, the line of her throat, the soft rise of her chest where the black fabric parted. She was meant to be veiled, hidden, untouchable, yet every inch of her defied the cloth, the vows, the fire that had failed to consume her. "You want to call me temptation," she said quietly, "then call me that. But know this, temptation is only power when the man standing before it chooses to bow." He swallowed hard, and for the first time that night, he let his hand drift. Not to her, not yet, but close enough that the gesture spoke louder than touch. His fingers hovered near the edge of her veil, so close the fabric quivered with the breath between them. "I've vowed to no man," he said, voice low, dangerous. "But I don't know if I can stand tall against you." Something flickered in her eyes then. Fear, maybe, or desire, or both twined so tightly together they were indistinguishable. "Then don't stand tall," she whispered. "Just stand true." The words hit him deeper than he wanted to admit. Truth. It was a word he'd avoided most of his life, burying it under whiskey, smoke, and the shifting sands of the trail. But here, under the judgment of the stars and the weight of her gaze, there was no place to hide. He could only be what he was. A man stripped bare in the desert, armorless before a woman who had survived fire and come out harder, sharper, more alive than he could comprehend. And still, she was beautiful. He wanted her. More than whiskey, more than the road, more than the fleeting company of women who never stayed. But his want was tangled with fear that touching her would undo everything he was, fear that in reaching for her he would damn them both. She must have seen it in his eyes, for she lifted her hand then, slow and deliberate, until her fingers brushed the edge of his coat. A small gesture, but it was enough to set the desert spinning around him. Her touch was light, but it burned, a brand seared into his chest. "You were not damned for wanting," she said. "You were damned only for denying what you are." He caught her wrist gently, not to stop her but to steady himself. Her pulse beat against his fingers, quick and alive, proof that beneath the veil and the crucifix she was no saint carved in stone but a woman of flesh and fire. "You don't know what I am," he rasped. Her gaze didn't falter. "Then show me." The wind rose, swirling dust around their boots, carrying with it the scent of sage and ash. The ruined mission loomed behind her, its crumbling wall behind her, its crumbling walls like silent witnesses to their defiance. Above, the stars blazed brighter, eternal, indifferent. And in that moment, he felt it, something larger than himself, larger than her, larger than fear or desire. It was the weight of choice, pressing down on him like the desert night. He could step back, he could walk away, he could leave her as a memory, a ghost of temptation swallowed by sand and time. Or he could step forward, into the fire she carried, and let it consume him. His grip on her wrist tightened, his breath heavy. He searched her eyes, desperate for something, permission, denial, salvation. What he found was only reflection, his own hunger staring back at him, mirrored in her. The words left him before he could stop them, rough and raw as the desert itself. "God help me, I can't walk away." Her answer was a whisper, but it was everything. "Then don't." The desert night closed around them, endless and eternal, as he pulled her closer, and the world fell away until there was nothing left but fear and desire, colliding in the firelight of the stars. The desert did not sleep. It only waited, holding still as though to test them. The stars above gleamed like countless eyes, witnesses that neither blessed nor cursed, only observed. He held her wrist, and she held his gaze, and between them the air was charged, alive, trembling with the weight of choice. Her words, "Then don't," echoed inside him, not as permission but as command, and he realized then that he was not the one leading. For all his grit, all his battles, all his years surviving by instinct and strength, here in this barren place she was the fire, and he was the moth drawn helplessly toward it. He drew her closer, the distance between them shrinking until her veil brushed against his chest. The fabric was cool, but beneath it he felt her warmth, her heartbeat quickening to match his. For a moment, he simply stood there, breathing her in, the faint trace of ash and desert air clinging to her skin. "You know what this means," he said, his voice hoarse. "Yes," she whispered, "it means we are alive." His lips almost touched her temple, so near the line where the veil ended and her skin began. He closed his eyes, fighting against himself. He had wanted women before, more than he could count, but never like this, not with reverence, not with fear, not with the sense that in taking this step he wasn't just surrendering to desire but surrendering to something sacred and profane all at once. Her hand rose slowly, fingers brushing the side of his face. The touch was tender, but beneath it was urgency, a pull he couldn't resist. She guided his head down until their foreheads touched, and in the silence that followed, he heard her whisper, "Tell me the truth, cowboy. Not with words, with your soul." The last string inside him snapped. He kissed her. Not gently, not with restraint, but with the hunger of a man who had been wandering deserts his whole life only to stumble upon water. She answered with equal fire, her body pressing against his, the rosary slipping from her fingers into the sand below. The kiss was not merely lips meeting lips. It was confession. It was rebellion. It was two broken lives colliding in the dark, daring the stars themselves to judge them. When they parted, breathless, he looked down at her, half expecting shame to flood her eyes. Instead, he saw defiance. Defiance mixed with something softer, something he had never thought he would see in a woman so fierce, relief. "I am not afraid," she said. "You should be," he replied. "Why?" "Because I ain't the kind of man you should trust with your soul." Her lips curved, a bittersweet smile glimmering in the moonlight. "And I am not the kind of woman who needs to be saved." The words silenced him, not because they were sharp but because they were true. For the first time, he understood. She had not come to him for protection, or salvation, or absolution. She had come to him because she was done hiding, done pretending, done praying to empty skies. She wanted to live, even if it meant sin, even if it meant fire. The night deepened around them, the desert swallowing their shadows. He pulled her closer still, his arms circling her as though to shield her from the emptiness. She led him, though they both knew no arms could shield them from what was coming, whether it was God's wrath, man's judgment, or the raw consequences of their choice. "Stay with me tonight," she said suddenly, the words rushing out as though she had held them back for too long. "Don't leave me to the silence." He hesitated, the weight of the request pressing against his chest. But when he looked into her eyes, he knew he could no more walk away than he could stop breathing. "I'll stay," he said. She leaned against him then, her head resting briefly against his chest. The sound of her breath was steady, though he felt the tremor in her body. They stood like that for a long time, two figures, clinging to each other in the middle of nothingness, until the desert air grew colder and the stars wheeled higher. At last, he led her a few steps from the tracks where they stood. The sand crunched softly beneath their boots as they found a small rise, the ruins of the mission still visible in the distance, its jagged silhouette like a broken crown against the horizon. He shrugged off his coat and laid it on the ground, a rough kind of gesture, but it was all he had to give. She sat, folding her black dress beneath her, the veil falling around her like a shroud. He lowered himself beside her, every movement deliberate, as though the desert itself would remember. For a long while, they did not speak. The night wrapped around them, endless and eternal. Only when he reached for her hand again, threading his fingers through hers, did she finally whisper, "Cowboy, when the fire took everything, I thought I would die with it. And when I lived, I thought God had abandoned me. But here, now, I wonder if I was wrong." He turned his head, studying her face in the pale glow of the moon. "Wrong how? Maybe God does answer," she said softly. "But not with walls, not with prayers. Maybe he answers with people. People who stand at the edge of your fear and dare you to cross it." He swallowed, the words striking deep. "And you think that's me?" She met his gaze, unwavering. "I know it is." Something broke inside him then, not in pain but in release. For years he had carried himself like a shadow, drifting from one town to the next, never belonging, never staying, never daring to hope. But here, in the eyes of a woman who had lost everything, he found himself seen. Not as a wanderer, not as a sinner, not as a ghost, but as a man. He reached for her again, his lips finding hers, softer this time, lingering. Her hands rose to his shoulders, pulling him closer, anchoring him in the only place that had ever felt real. The desert sighed around them, as though the land itself had been waiting for this moment, for two souls to meet and burn beneath the indifferent stars. The night was vast, endless, a black sea pierced by cold stars. They lay side by side on his coat, her veil fallen loose around her shoulders, the crucifix half buried in the sand beside them. Silence pressed in, but it was no longer empty, it was charged, alive, fragile as glass. The cowboy kept his gaze on the sky, afraid to look at her too long, afraid of what he might see. Or worse, what he might feel. He had faced death, violence, the kind of loneliness that hollowed men out, but nothing had ever unsettled him like the nearness of this woman. "You still haven't answered me," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the desert quiet. He turned his head, meeting her eyes in the moonlight. "I told you, I fear you because I desire you. Desire you because I fear what happens if I don't." She shook her head slightly. "That wasn't my question, not really. I asked if you fear me or desire me. Tonight, you have to choose." He stared at her, the weight of her demand pressing into his chest. She didn't want half-truths. She didn't want the words of a man used to sidestepping life. She wanted the whole of him, or nothing. "Why does it matter so much to you?" he asked, his voice rough. "Because fear binds men, and desire frees them," she replied. "I've lived bound too long. I need to know which chain you carry." Her words pierced him deeper than a bullet. He thought of the years behind him. Saloon doors swinging shut, cards slapped on dusty tables, the stench of whiskey, the sound of guns. He thought of all the faces he had left behind, and the hollowness that followed him wherever he rode. He thought of the woman he once nearly married, who had walked away because he could not offer her more than the road. And now here she was, demanding to know if he would let fear or desire claim him. He rolled onto his side, facing her fully. His hand reached out, fingers brushing her cheek. Her skin was soft, but the look in her eyes was iron, demanding, unyielding. "I desire you," he said finally, each word pulled from the depths of him like stone from the earth. "More than the road, more than the bottle, more than the life I've been living. And maybe that scares me, but I ain't gonna pretend it don't burn in me like fire." Her breath caught, and for a moment she closed her eyes, as if the words had struck too deep. When she opened them again, there was no fire of challenge, only a glimmer of something he hadn't seen before: trust. "Then you are not lost," she whispered. Before he could reply, she leaned forward and kissed him. This time it was not rebellion, not hunger, but something quieter, more dangerous: surrender. The kiss deepened, their bodies drawing together as though the desert itself willed it. His hand slid to her back, pulling her close, and she pressed into him with a need that defied the vows she once carried. The night was filled with their breaths, ragged and urgent, mingling like prayers torn from broken lips. When they finally parted, both trembling, she laid her head against his chest. The steady thump of his heart filled her ears, anchoring her in the present, far from the flames of the past. "I thought I had nothing left," she murmured. "But tonight, I feel alive again." He held her tighter, burying his face in her hair. "I ain't much of a man to give you anything. But if staying alive means holding you like this, then maybe I've been wrong about what life's worth." The desert wind rose again, scattering sand over them like a shroud. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, long and mournful, but the sound did not break them. It only reminded them that the world outside still existed, vast and unforgiving. She tilted her head to look at him once more. "At dawn, we will both have to choose," she said. Softly, "The desert doesn't forgive lies." He nodded, though he wasn't sure if he was ready for dawn. Night could hold them in its fragile embrace a little longer, but the sun would tear open everything: truth, consequence, the weight of who they were. Still, as her fingers curled into his shirt and her body pressed close against his, he knew one thing with certainty: whatever dawn brought, he could no longer imagine it without her. The desert night grew colder, the kind of cold that crept into bones and made men ache. But beneath his coat, pressed together, they were a fire unto themselves. She breathed against his chest, and he felt each rise and fall like a rhythm binding them tighter than any vow. He should have been restless. He should have been thinking about what came next, what it meant to take her in his arms, to confess desire where faith once ruled her life. Instead, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: stillness. Not the hollow stillness of an empty road, but the quiet after a storm, when the world holds its breath. "Tell me," she said suddenly, her voice muffled against him, "what haunts you most?" The question made his chest tighten. He'd buried his ghosts deep, locked them away where whiskey could dull them. But in the dark, with her pressed against him, he couldn't lie. "Once," he said, his voice rough, "I rode with a woman. She was fierce, like you, but different. We planned a life. I thought I could leave the road behind. But I failed her. My hands knew guns better than they knew gentleness, and she saw it. She left, not with anger, just with sorrow, and I never forgave myself for not being enough to keep her." She shifted, lifting her head to meet his gaze. "You think that made you less of a man?" He nodded slightly. "A man's worth is in what he can hold onto. I never held onto nothing but a saddle and a pistol." Her hand rose to his face, fingers tracing the weathered lines time and regret had carved. "You held me tonight," she whispered, "and I am not running." The words cut through him like light through cracks in stone. He swallowed hard, unable to speak, afraid that if he did, the fragile moment would break. She settled against him again, her hair brushing his chin. For a while, silence reclaimed them, broken only by the sigh of wind through the brush. Then she spoke again, softer, as if confessing a secret she had never dared speak aloud. "When the fire took the mission, I prayed. Not for life, but for death. I thought there was nothing left for me. And when death did not come, I cursed God for leaving me to wander." Her hand tightened against his shirt. "But perhaps I was not abandoned. Perhaps I was being led here. To you." His chest tightened. "Don't put that on me," he said hoarsely. "I ain't no answer to prayer. I'm just a man who ain't figured out how to stop writing." She pulled back enough to look him in the eye. "Maybe God doesn't answer with saints and angels. Maybe he answers with broken men who stumble into broken women, and together they find a way to be whole." He wanted to argue, to shake his head, but her gaze held him, unwavering, filled with a conviction fiercer than any sermon. And in that moment, for the first time in his life, he felt something close to belief. Not in God, but in her. The hours passed, and the moon sank lower, dragging the night toward its inevitable end. The first faint hints of dawn painted the horizon with pale light, a warning that the fragile cocoon of darkness would soon shatter. She noticed it too, her body tensed slightly in his arms, as though she feared the sun more than the fire that had once consumed her. "At dawn, it will change," she whispered. "All of this." He stroked her hair gently, rough fingers tangling in the strands. "Maybe, but dawn don't erase the night. What we shared, it's carved now, like scars. Sunlight can't take it away." Her eyes glimmered, wet in the fading dark. "What if the world takes it away? What if your road pulls you from me? What if my vows come crawling back?" He leaned his forehead against hers, steady, unyielding. "Then I'll fight the world. Fight the road. Fight your vows. I ain't afraid of battles. But losing you, that's the one fight I can't let myself lose." Her breath caught, and for the first time since he met her, she let the tears fall. They slipped silently down her cheeks, catching in the faint light. She clutched him tighter, as though she believed him, as though she wanted to believe nothing could part them. And for a fleeting moment, he believed it too. The horizon brightened, the stars dimmed, the desert began to wake with the restless stir of morning. Soon, the world would return, harsh, demanding, unforgiving. But for these final moments of night, they clung to each other as though their embrace could hold back the dawn itself. The horizon bled with color, faint strokes of gold, rose, and violet spreading over the desert like the slow unfurling of truth. The night, once their sanctuary, began to dissolve. Shadows shrank, the stars dimmed, retreating as if unwilling to witness what morning would demand of them. She sat up slowly, pulling his coat tighter around her shoulders. The crucifix lay half buried in the sand where it had fallen. She picked it up, turned it in her hands, the silver catching the newborn light. For a long time, she said nothing. The cowboy rose to his feet, brushing sand from his trousers. He felt the weight of his gun at his hip, heavier than usual, as though the world wanted to remind him who he was. He watched her with something between fear and reverence, as if she were both salvation and judgment in one. Finally, she lifted her gaze. Her eyes were swollen from tears, her hair tangled from the night, but she had never looked more beautiful, or more unearthly. "This is where the choice comes," she whispered. He swallowed hard. "I know." "Then say it," she pressed, voice trembling but fierce. "Do you leave this night behind and ride on, like you've always done? Or do you lay your road down here, with me?" The words struck him like gunfire, but not because they wounded, because they demanded. His whole life had been about fleeing, from towns, from promises, from himself. The road had always been his excuse, his refuge, his curse. And here she was, offering him an end to it. He stepped closer, kneeling before her. He took her hands in his, rough palms closing around fragile fingers. His voice was raw, scraped clean of lies. "I've been running my whole damn life. From love, from God, from the man I should have been. But last night," his throat tightened. "Last night, you gave me a reason to stop. You asked if I feared you or desired you. And I know now the answer's both, but the fear don't matter. Only the desire, only you." Her lips parted, a soft gasp escaping, and she pressed the crucifix to her chest as if steadying herself. "If you choose me, it won't be easy. The church will condemn me. The world will condemn you. We will walk in exile, together." He gave a grim smile. "Exile's just another word for freedom, if we got each other." For a moment, silence held them, broken only by the cry of a hawk wheeling overhead. The sun crested the horizon, washing the desert in gold, turning every grain of sand into fire. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "Then it's done. We choose." And in that moment, as the sun rose, they kissed again, long, fierce, sealing the vow they had made not with words, but with the surrender of their souls. When they pulled apart, she stood, letting his coat fall from her shoulders. She fastened her veil loosely once more, but her eyes burned with a new light. No longer a nun bound by ashes, no longer a woman swallowed by grief. She was reborn, fierce as the desert sun. He took her hand, and together they began to walk. The desert stretched before them, endless and unforgiving, but for the first time, he did not see it as emptiness. He saw it as a road they would carve together, step by step, scar by scar, desire by desire. Behind them, the night vanished, leaving only memory. Ahead of them lay exile, danger, the unknown. But between them, between the fear and the desire, was something far greater, the choice to belong, not to the world, but to each other. And so, when the sun burned full and the day began, the cowboy no longer feared the road. He desired it, because she walked it beside him. Thank you so much for watching this story till the very end. Your support means more than words can ever say. If you felt the depth of this journey, don't forget to give it a like, share it with someone who needs it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Together, we'll keep bringing powerful stories to life, and your presence here makes all the difference.